Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Leading in a Crisis podcast. This is our first podcast of 2026, and we are very glad you're joining us for this episode today. On this podcast, we share stories from the front lines of crisis management and crisis communications, and we like to hear stories from experienced crisis leaders. I'm Tom Mueller. Hi again, everybody, and really glad you're here with us. On the show today, we are featuring a returning guest who's a friend of the show, Philippe Borremans, who is a Portugal-based international crisis and risk consultant, and is going to join us today to talk about the latest survey that he's conducted on risk, crisis, and emergency communications. Phil, welcome to the show again.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me again.
Okay. Well, Phil, I've been through the report and it's always very interesting. I guess first, let me just say thank you for taking the time and energy to put together a comprehensive document like this, based on actual input from more than 100 crisis professionals, crisis communications professionals. So you've tapped a kind of a neat audience there. And the fact that you can get people to return surveys is sort of miraculous, isn't it?
It it is, yeah. I didn't, when you start out with a survey like that, you think, oh, I'll ask around. So I've got my newsletter and I've got subscribers, and so maybe these people we want to answer. But I was a bit amazed of the return, at least for the valid responses, right? You get many, but not complete. But this is based on 102 valid responses, rather international, which I like.
Hmm.
One question was about, how many years experience. It's pretty senior colleagues, professionals who responded to this. And with 102, I think we can at least, discover some trends and some insights.
Hmm. Well, you've certainly mined out some interesting things here. So for the crisis professionals among us, which is pretty much everyone among us here, what are the key takeaways for you from this year's survey data?
Well, of course, when you set up a survey, you have your questions in mind already. There's a bias in there, but there are a couple of topics I couldn't get around or not include in the survey. So AI was in there, of course. How is AI used, etc. And then I also wanted to know, there's a lot of talk about resilience, whatever that means, right?
Hmm.
But I wanted to see, okay, people talk about this. We have structures in place. Most of us have an experience in crisis communication, but how ready are we? And so maybe I'll start with the AI thing. This is just a confirmation of other reports I've seen. In the broader scope of public relations professionals or communicators, we know AI is a hot topic. We know our people are using AI, but then what does that actually mean? And this survey confirmed what I thought and saw in other reports, is that yes, AI is on the agenda. Yes, people know that it can help. People know what the dangers are. What was interesting to see is that while respondents confirmed the use of AI, it was a very basic use of AI, meaning content creation and things that the average internet user is doing with AI.
Right.
Not so much on the strategic use of AI, where you can actually use AI to do predictive analytics, where you can use AI and incorporate into your crisis simulation. So that was a clear distinction here. So the response was, yes, we know the pros and cons. We use it, but we use it rather basically. And if we need to invest time and energy, then it will be in that more strategic use. So that was already one thing that just confirmed the trend where AI is there, but we've actually not used it in a strategic level in crisis communication.
Right. Well, that
Another
reflects
one,
sort of the global transition that it feels like we're in right now, right?
yeah.
With, you know, there's a big bubble out there of cash being invested in AI and data centers and all
Yeah.
of that. And maybe it's going to be huge. There's an undercurrent of people out there who say, yeah, this bubble might burst, or the data center requirements might be too much energy that could derail things. So there's a lot of uncertainty. But at the same time, if you're in the working world, you're drinking from a fire hose now, trying
Hmm.
to understand how does this AI work? How can I use it? So it seems like the survey really reflected sort
Yeah,
of people tiptoeing in to the edge of the pond
yeah.
here.
Yeah, and then also I asked around, okay, well, what are the barriers? You know, if you're not on that totally incorporated way of using AI, what are the barriers? And that was really interesting to see. It's around 23% said skills. So the tools are there, but we've not been trained in using this. There's also a lack in specific training for communicators on how to use AI. So 23% said skills is a top barrier. The other one is budget. Well, we're always underfunded. And then of course one thing that came in 14.7% privacy and security reasons, which is logical, right? Why
Hmm.
would you use a publicly available system where your data goes into the cloud when you're, maybe using AI for sensitive stuff like crisis communication? So that was interesting to see what the
Hmm.
barriers were as well. Yeah.
Right. And of course there's sort of answers to those things, right? But today our perception is there might be great risk here to our company data or our proprietary data. And so we're going to take it very slowly. But you can just address that one for us quickly here, Phil, because you can, carve out a space within LLM or an AI model that's just proprietary to your company today,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's when I speak to clients, customers, even colleagues in the field, I just read a LinkedIn post about someone saying, well, the new version of DeepSeek, which is Chinese large language model, will come out and will revolutionize because it's supposedly better than others and what have you. But of course, the first reactions are, well, it's Chinese, it's dangerous, we shouldn't. Nobody is saying, well, you just download the model, put it on your own machine, cut it off from the internet, and you have a working, strong, powerful machine that can actually do stuff. Nobody is looking at using open source models, testing and trialing it. And then some people in comms specifically say, well, it's complicated. Well, if you look at where technology is going, it's getting less and less complicated. It's download, install, run. And of course, it's not as easy as doing that with standardized software. But if you have a little bit of an IT person next to you, it is all possible. But it's not just top of mind of, oh, yes, we can do it this way as well. So,
Right. Well, it seems we're getting further and further away from human interaction with the way technology is pushing us all forward here. And I don't know that it is probably simple, but I think the concept of using these things is just difficult for most humans until we get exposed to it and learn it a little
yeah.
bit. But it's like any new technology, right? When the
It is. It is really like any new technology, and it's understanding the basics and then surrounding yourself with people who are actually a bit more specialized in that. But I think it's much more interesting in looking what the potential is, and of course always look at the dangers as well. I mean, it's not like any technology can be misused, and that is the case with AI, definitely with AI as well. Which made me think another insight is I asked a question about Gen AI and deep fakes and these stories of negative use of AI, and that was also interesting. Where yes, the respondents recognized that issue, and it was also one that was listed really on top of their responses. But then when I ask about, okay, so you recognize the dangers of deep fakes and all that can go wrong with manipulation of imagery and sound and what have you. So that was very high up as recognized as a danger. But then when you ask them about, well, okay, so it's dangerous. Do you have protocols in place? And then, of course, you see that only 3.9% said they had tested AI crisis protocols in place. Only 3.9. 27.5 said we have no protocols in place and no plans in place. And then 31% said, well, we're developing, we're thinking about it. So that is really interesting because the gap is not awareness, right? Our colleagues know there can be a misuse of AI,
Mhm.
but it's yeah, decision rights and verification steps and things like that are not in place. So that was really an interesting takeaway as well.
Yeah, does that fit into the sort of capability chasm
Yeah.
piece of it? Yeah. Um,
Yeah, I think I mean you know you see all these cases coming out with deep fakes and what have you, and then of course it's on the agenda and on the radar. But then translating from that, how do we prepare? How do we adapt our protocols? What should we do if one day there is a deep fake coming out of our CEO or whatever? That hasn't been thought out, at least not what I see from this survey, right?
mhm. Right. But it's just amazing to me how the threat matrix is shifting now with the new technologies coming out, and communications teams really need to be thinking about what is the new potential here, where you've got
Yeah,
a video of your CEO caught on a kiss cam somewhere, right? Except it wasn't your
yeah.
CEO. But those kind of things can go viral quickly, especially, if there's nefarious actors out there pushing it,
Yeah.
right?
And it comes down to, if I just look at the survey, I mean, AI is being used. It's definitely not integrated. It's very rare. So one in 87 respondents said, we have integrated AI protocols and we integrate it in our work. But again, coming back to the what is holding them back, it's very mundane. Skills, budget, and privacy security issues.
Hmm.
It's not like it's a huge unsurmountable thing.
Right.
Of budget is probably the most difficult one there, but skills you can find them. Privacy security, there's ways around that, and again with the help of IT,
Hmm.
and it's documented. So my advice there is do, even if those are breaks and that you need to start very small.
Hmm.
Find someone just maybe for a very short period of time to work on a very small project that doesn't take huge budgets. Look at with IT, how you can secure that on your own machine or on your own server,
Hmm.
and start thinking about how does that impact my crisis preparedness planning.
For folks who are working full time now and are fully engaged in their day-to-day roles and accountabilities, this is a whole new bucket of water to carry around
Hmm.
with you each day,
Yeah.
right? Trying to, because there's so much to learn, there's so much risk associated with it. So I feel for folks who, are running fast every day and yet still trying to onboard some of this new technology. But
Yeah.
there's really no way around this learning process other than jumping in and playing with it, right?
Yeah. But there's other things that are on the people, I mean, colleagues are aware of them. For one question, which was I thought, let me ask a very general question and see how that goes. One of the questions was, is trust harder to get and to maintain compared to 5 years ago? And 65, almost 66% said it's much more challenging than 5 years ago. Okay, good. I understand that. Everybody understands that. But then when you ask about, well, which kind of measurement do you have in place? How do you measure the effectiveness of your crisis preparedness? How do you measure your trust levels? Do you have a benchmark about trust levels? No, no, people don't have it. So again, it's being aware of an issue, but do you actually have the basic systems in place? And not only systems, but just methodology. I mean, measurement, evaluation, and learning. I mean, and it's not in place. So if that doesn't change, it will continue to be an issue. Same with AI, same with trust, same with other things.
Hmm. Right. Well, if you don't have that baseline data, as you point out in the report, then how do you know where your trust
Yeah.
meter is if you have a problem? The challenge, though, is it can cost some serious money to run regular, routine surveys to establish baseline. You want to find those particular stakeholders that you want to interview and get their thoughts
Mm.
on the company, and then circle back with those. But it comes back to your earlier point. Budget is a big one for that. But skills and capabilities is probably not, because there's so many firms that can do that for you.
Yeah. And I also sometimes think, having worked in big multinationals where you have to fight for your little piece of budget, etc., what I often did was also, and this was private sector, right? So I looked at other departments, because if you think, okay, I'm in comms and I'm a crisis communicator, and to your point of it costs money and energy and resources to do regular surveys and things like that. Yeah, but why not tap into customer support data? Marketing colleagues have that information,
Hmm.
and it's a commercial trust. Sure, we have to translate that into reputational trust. Sure, but you would be doing stakeholder outreach. Why not insert a question or two in there about, so look broader than the department, because if it's all for your department, sure, you're not going to get the budget to do that in a professional way on a regular basis. Definitely not. But look at what you can translate. Look at what other data points are within the business, within the organization, and probably you can have a good sense. This is not about, scientific measurement and academic studies. It's about getting a benchmark where you say, okay, we understand that this is the kind of trust level we have. These are the gaps. Let's work with that, because at the end of the day, you have to work with what you have. The thing that the survey says is that most of them have nothing in place. And so, okay, well, from nothing to something, that's already a step forward, I think.
All right. So one of the key takeaways there then is get some baseline data,
Yeah.
understand where your company or your agency reputation sits today. But the trust deficit thing sort of fascinates me, and it reflects the deep polarization we're seeing in our societies these days. Certainly, boy, we feel it here in America, but I know across the EU, many countries are, you're feeling this sort of red versus blue polarity thing. But that plays into the trust factor as well. And how do we, anything in the data to talk to us about how we, if I'm a company and I have an incident that comes up, possibly half the people aren't going to trust me out of the box on this,
Mhm.
or I don't know. What do you? I mean, I feel very pessimistic when I think about that, right? It's such an uphill climb for any communicator who's trying to, communicate actively and accurately around an incident, and yet it may be for naught, it feels like. So make me feel better about that, will you, Phil?
Well, I think, first of all, I put the trust question in there because a month ago I wrote an article which was more like, I was a little bit fed up in seeing this, what I called in my article, rather critical article, what I call the trust mantra. Every single conference you go, every single report you read from the communications profession, at least there is one slide or one paragraph that says, we have to build trust. What does that mean? It doesn't mean anything at all. Trust is not a universal concept. It depends on where you are on the globe, what your background is, what your view on society is, how you've been educated. We think this is like, we use this word, trust,
Hmm.
like the silver bullet that solves everything. But it is just one of 12, I think, very important human biases and feelings that play on the overall reputation to an organization or a person or something else. So let's take a step back. That would be my advice. Don't
Hmm.
talk about trust. And again, this is just to be a little bit, pushy, but don't talk about trust. Look at, if your organization is facing an issue, what are you actually doing? Let's look more at what we actually do as an organization to solve the problem. Let's make it real. Because from there, trust could be built in a certain environment. Trust is not an objective, it's something that follows how you react to a crisis, an emergency, or an issue. It is not the main thing. It is actually a result of the steps that you take. And so that focus And as I said, seeing every single speaker at a conference, that's what I was thinking about when I wrote that rather critical article. Let's build trust. Yeah, well, let's kumbaya. Let's all sit around the campfire and be nice to each other. Great. Nobody can say no to that.
Right.
But what does it actually mean? So I think it's better to step away a little bit from that mantra and go back to, okay, what do we actually have in place when things go wrong? How can we demonstrate actually to our different stakeholders and audiences that we are going to do the right thing in a culturally acceptable way, in a very transparent way, etc. That will build trust. It's a reaction to something. It's not the ultimate goal, I think.
Right. And I think in your article or other writings of yours I've seen, you really talk about sort of the granularity of your audiences and your
Yeah, yeah,
stakeholders, right? So, build trust with whom?
yeah,
And most companies have identified key stakeholders who are influential to their business, whether it's communities around operating facilities or shareholders, regulators, whoever it is. But yeah, it's identifying those, meeting their needs, answering their questions, and building trust kind of from the grassroots level on
yeah.
up. Yeah.
That is one of the things I'm very much, as you say. I mean, I do make a strong difference between stakeholders and audiences. It's not the same thing, and they tend to be thrown along at the same lot in a crisis communications plan. But no, a stakeholder is different than an audience, and how the way that you approach them, that you segment them, that you work with them, that you communicate with them is different. And that should be recognized. It's one of the questions in the survey was as well, do you actually adapt your crisis communication messages depending on your stakeholders and audiences and depending on the situation? Again, the majority said no. Well, how can you not adapt your crisis messages to your different stakeholders and
Right.
audiences?
Right.
The general public doesn't exist. If you communicate in a crisis situation to the general public, you're communicating to no one. And so that was another thing that came out of the survey, where I said, well, really there's work to be done about doing stakeholder identification and management, but also
Mhm.
audience segmentation and management, and see how you adapt and can quickly adapt your messages depending on the situation.
That's fascinating because, every sort of crisis incident I've worked, we come up with, holding statements, press releases, whatever it is. You push it out to the field and then, or your government affairs teams, and then they're sort of interpreting that and having conversations with those stakeholder groups and, sort of localizing what it is you're saying. So that to me is sort of interesting
Mm,
that you're seeing people who aren't doing that, or maybe just haven't thought through that whole process, because it absolutely does need to get customized depending on what the situation is.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, well, there were a couple sort of non-surprising things that came out of the survey. One of those was the preparing and practice gaps. Talk to us a little bit
Unfortunately,
about,
not surprising.
yeah, yeah, that's not.
Yeah.
So what did you see from the data there?
So the data on the question of, how many times you actually test your plan, your beautiful written manual that sits there gathering dust. Uh, so only 26.5% test at least annually. 9.8% report they never test. And it was really interesting because I had a good balance between respondents from the public sector and the private sector.
Hmm.
So public sector, I having worked on for both clients from both sectors, I understand public sector is often multi-agency when you have an emergency and things like that. So that brings complexity, and it's very difficult to get people together and say let's test this on a regular basis. Sure, government organizations do full-scale simulations. I've run them, but it's the big thing. It's like, oh, we prepare 2 years to do that. It's not the ongoing ones. And then the private sector, But I think it's also a matter that reputation and operational risks move very fast. So that's a bit of a contradiction because we know it moves very fast. So annual only testing that is really, lagging behind real-time dynamics. It should be more. And we know there's also a misconception about crisis simulations, I think. I was at a conference, speaking at a conference, and a lady asked a question. She said, well, I completely understand as a communicator that we need to test our plans, but I have no clue at all on how to request the resources for this to my management. And so I dove into my writings and I said, oh, I remembered I wrote something on how can you make a business case out of this? How do you go to your senior management and say, this is the business case to give me a lot of money
Yeah.
and do regular crisis simulations? And it's tying back to, risk management. It's tying back to reputational impact. It's tying back to sales figures. Let's not forget, if you have a product recall, you feel it at the end of the year in your financial reporting.
Mm-hmm.
So it's trying to speak that language of senior management and say, look, why do you take insurance? It costs a lot of money. Why do you take insurance? So why don't I get a budget to run regular simulations? And then again, regular simulations, what does it mean? It doesn't mean you have to do the full scale. I'm much more about, I love doing full scales because it's fun, but I'm much more about doing very regular, mini, even half-hour micro simulations with very specific teams, lunch and learn sessions, and maybe
Yeah.
every 3 months a tabletop exercise of 3-4 hours with a good after action reporting. But do it regularly because that's what builds then, muscle memory
Yeah. Or
for
to,
when the thing actually happens.
yeah, if you have a monthly team meeting, put a 30-minute item on the agenda. Hey,
Yeah,
let's talk through a crisis scenario here and let's surface any issues. Of course, then you've got the follow-up with that, right?
of
And
course. Yeah,
somebody's
yeah,
got
yeah,
to invest time and energy to make
sure.
that all happen.
But
Um,
it can be very small and micro. I mean, when I run workshops at conference, so you don't have a lot of time and you have a very diverse audience, so you can't really do a simulation specifically. But I did create a small AI model that I instructed, and so it's actually my virtual simulation player,
mhm.
and it's role playing, and I can do that with a very diverse team in a room, half an hour. They go through the role playing thing, and at the end, everybody always tells me, wow, this is great. It didn't take a lot of time. It was very pertinent because you decide which kind of crisis scenario you want to play.
Now,
And it
Phil, can
actually
I?
gives you feedback.
Yeah. So is that the tool where individually you go in and
Yeah,
kind of plug in your
yeah,
experience level, pick a
yeah, yeah,
scenario that you want to deal with?
yeah. And
Yeah,
you can
I've
actually play that with a team. You could do it individually, but you put it on a big screen and you can all brainstorm on the answer to be given in the role-playing thing. But it's micro simulations like that. And I think doing that on a regular basis is really important. Like, again, for, that muscle memory that you need.
All right. Good. Boy, lots of great advice here today again, Phil. Thank you for that. Anything? Oh, one other thing I wanted to just highlight about this particular report and this the time and effort that you put into creating this, which is a very useful tool. But you have in each section, you have a section or a page called Implications for Professionals,
Hmm.
and where you draw out sort of conclusions and forward thinking about what the results of this say for us as crisis communications professionals. So, first of all, I just want to say thanks for doing that. But what's behind that approach for you in creating, adding that piece to it?
Well, the thing is, when you work as a solo consultant, you're engaged in your work and you do your thing, and then I write a lot of things, and sometimes I wake up and I say, like, just before getting on the call, I put the final touches to a white paper kind of guide I wrote about how do you handle when you have a drone sighting or a drone you know running around your plant or your whatever. That's simply because I find drones fascinating and because it was in the news and we think they're everywhere, which is not, but anyway. And so I then sit down and do
Yeah,
some
yeah.
research and write up. So it's very spontaneous. And this survey is something I've done another survey a year ago. Um, and it's for me also to get input from my tribe, as I call them, my colleagues, because these are all I consider all of them colleagues. We do the same profession, so and it's also a finger on the pulse. I think it's important to get that feeling of what is actually moving, because if you just read, then you would think that the whole world is running around on AI, which is not. You would think that everybody's prepared for the next crisis because polycrisis, what have you. It is not. So it's just like, what is the reality? What are people actually facing in their day-to-day job? As you said, I mean, the realities of working for either public sector or private sector in a larger organization, they're different because we consultants, we think, oh, we've got the answer, but then you're faced with the reality of people working in larger organizations and facing politics and all these things. So no, it's a reality check, and also getting that input, and then trying to, as you said, I mean, trying to answer as well potential or provide potential solutions to the issues that I see coming out of the survey. Yeah.
So if folks want to get a copy of your report or your newsletter, Wag the Dog, where should they go to find that?
So the newsletter is on www.wagthedog.io, and the survey is on a landing page, but it has a very long URL. But through Wag the Dog, you'll be able to find it as well.
Okay. And it's available on LinkedIn as well. You've
It's
had
yeah, yeah.
some posts around it there. Okay. All right. Awesome. Phil, for this, we'll pause here. I want to say thanks again for joining me on this episode, and look forward to having you back again soon.
Thank you. Thank you.
In some of Phil's webinars and really enjoyed them. So appreciate that. Phil, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom, for the invitation.
And that's going to do it for this episode of the Leading in a Crisis podcast. Thanks so much for joining us. We're really happy you're here with us. We'll see you again soon on another episode. Take care.